So here's the actual Reddit post. This guy was tricked by a honeypot contract, right? He was beaten by another hacker. He thought he was the one doing the hacking. Let me zoom in quite a bit for you guys here. So he says, so here I am thinking that I'd have some fun hacking a contract, but it seems the contract pulled a trick on me instead. Very clever. This guy was a bit of a sport about it. He definitely learned a lot, as we'll be able to learn from him without making the same mistake, right? So perhaps I got beaten to the punch by another hacker. So here's what happened. While randomly browsing some contracts on Ethereum, I stumbled upon this contract. So if you go here, well, this is just the actual Etherscan info here, so I won't bore you with that. So he found basically a contract that looks something like this, where it was very clearly vulnerable to a reentrancy attack, right? And so he's like, okay, let me first pull this onto the Ropsten test network and put some test Ethereum on it and create a malicious contract and see if I can pull the test Ether from the contract to myself, right? And he was able to do that successfully. He's like, okay, perfect. I'm able to drain all the Ethereum from this contract. Let me go ahead and exploit the contract on the mainnet with actual Ethereum, right? So he went to do that, right? And what he found was it didn't work. He's like, the ETH got stuck in his contract. He's like, I was shocked because this guy, he had to, minimum deposit was 1 Ether. So he had to actually deposit one whole Ethereum. Now this was how long ago? This was 3 years ago. So it's not as much, nearly as much as it is now today as of the time of this recording. But he even says, here's my attack transaction. He knows the transaction still. He has it right here. He's like, but it didn't work. The ETH got stuck in his contract. He's like, I was shocked. How is it possible? What's funny is that Etherscan.io is showing internal transactions. The ETH was transferred to his contract, and then 2 transfers showing is going to my contract, my exploit contract. However, I didn't get anything. What is going on, right? He's like, well, out of desperation defeat, I called it again. He's like, kind of like the good old, did you try turning it on and off again logic? He's like, but he still didn't work. So he's just donating Ethereum to this attacker, basically, right? The guy who thinks he's the hacker, he's really the victim. He's really getting hacked by the creator of this contract. So by the time I went back to the drawing board to see if I have a bug with my exploit contract, by that time he did, right? However, it worked fine on the testnet, so not sure what the problem was. About 20 minutes later, I noticed that my victim got drained. It was done by this transaction. I'm quite baffled by that transaction. Did another hacker beat me to the punch? What did he do different to me? So basically what was going on is external contract referencing. So on the mainnet, he did a rug pull where he thought the contract was going to a certain address, was actually going to another address, a whole nother function. So basically, instead of exploiting this contract, he actually ended up donating money to the guy. All right, welcome back to some more Solidity smart contract vulnerabilities here. This time we're looking at external contract referencing. This one is a really like mind-tripping one. It's very interesting. It might be a little bit difficult to wrap your head around at first, but we're gonna break this one down best we can here. So I was saying one of the benefits of the Ethereum global computer is the ability to reuse code and interact with contracts already deployed on the network. So basically, you have all these contracts, whatever functions you have as public, people can call them from their own contracts. So they can write their own contracts and reuse your code if you provide it as publicly accessible, right? Pretty standard there. But the thing is that you can actually, with these externally referenced contracts, the operation, use of external message calls to interact with the contracts, you can actually change where they point to, right? Like, if you don't hard code the address, you can actually change what is actually being referenced. So you could have like a malicious contract somewhere and have it to where the users think they're calling a certain contract when in reality they're calling another contract. So as the users of the contract, the external contracts, the other users that integrate with that, they got to be very careful with what contracts they're pulling in, because you can, if you know crypto, it's all about rug pulls, right? All about rug pulling. So you got to be careful you don't get rugged here. And this is how. basically, right? If that sounds a little bit esoteric here, we're going to be breaking it down, looking at real world applications of it as well. So don't worry. So with the vulnerability, right, any address can be cast as a contract address, regardless of whether the code at the address represents the contract type being cast. That's an important thing to note. There is no check in solidity that guarantees that, right? So it can be deceiving, especially when the author is trying to hide malicious code. Here's an example. So if we imagine we have a contract that implements ROT13 encryption, basically what that is, if you're not familiar, is you're just rotating each character ahead by 13 characters. So A is, I don't know, whatever 13 characters is after A, and so on and so forth. And of course, if you have like Z or something, it's going to wrap around, wrapping to the other side, right? Basically, that's all you need to know about this code. It's just implementing that for encryption and decrypting that. So that's basically what it's saying there. Now, if you imagine there's a contract that tries to use that, tries to pull in that external contract to apply ROT13 encryption, right? If they set up their constructor like this to initialize it, right? You're just kind of taking for granted that, okay, this encryption library is what I think it is, you know? You're kind of just taking this contract's word for it that it is what it says it is, right? Like if we use the constructor encryption library equals underscore encryption library. So the issue with the contract is that encryption library address is not public or constant, okay? Thus, the deployer of the contract could have given an address in the constructor which points to, I don't know, say this contract instead, which this is a little joke that the author made here, ROT26 encryption, where it rotates by 26. Well, if you know anything about the English alphabet, is there's 26 characters. So basically, it's going to wrap around to itself, and thus everything's going to be in plain text. So it's not actually going to encrypt anything, right? And so that was just a proof of concept there. And here's another thing to note, right? Again, there's no need to understand the assembly in the contract. The deployer could also link the following contract, right? Contract, print, the text, plain text, right? And in this case, if the address of either of these contracts were given in the constructor, encryption private data function would simply produce an event which prints the unencrypted private data. Although in this example, a library-like contract was set in the constructor, it is often the case that a privileged user, such as an owner, can change the library contract address. That's the big part, right? If a link contract doesn't contain the function being called, the fallback function will execute. For example, with the line encryption library ROT13 encrypt, if the contract specified by encryption library was, say, this, you actually have a fallback function, right, where you could have some like malicious code in there, and then that will run because the link contract doesn't contain the function being called. So definitely all this is about rug pulling here today, if you haven't noticed, right? So, and also a special note, yeah, definitely don't use the ROT cipher. Obviously, that's not a secure encryption cipher. But as far as the preventative techniques, so as demonstrated above, vulnerability-free contracts in some cases must be deployed in such a way that they behave, can be deployed in such a way that they behave maliciously. An auditor could publicly verify a contract and have its owner deployed in a malicious way, right? So it could have been valid at the time, and then they changed the address, they rug pull you later. So that could happen, right? Resulting in a publicly audited contract which has vulnerabilities or malicious intent. So how do we actually prevent this? Well, one way they say is to use the new keyword in your constructor when you're creating contracts. So if we would have instead had the constructor be encryption library equals new ROT13 encryption instead of underscore encryption library, right? So this way, an instance of the reference contract is created at deployment time, right? Not changed later, but at deployment time it's created. And the deployer cannot replace the ROT13 encryption contract with anything else without modifying the smart contract itself. So yeah, you definitely want to be doing it that way, right? Another solution is to hard code any external contract addresses if they're known. So if you had some way to know where what the actual address is, because obviously if he tries to rug pull it and change it to something else, it will be a completely different address. And if you have it hard coded in there, what it's supposed to be, then that can prevent some heartache there, right? So yeah, and basically just saying, hey, always pay attention to these things if you're a developer, right? Very clear to understand why, right? But now here is a real world example that is super cool, right? We looked at the reentrancy attack on the first video of this series, right? That was the very first one that we even explored. Well, it turns out that there were some honeypots that looked like they would be vulnerable to reentrancy attacks, but really they rug pulled the actual address where it sends the Ethereum to. So well, the address of the contract, I should say, right? So these attackers, they thought they were exploiting the contract with a reentrancy vulnerability to get themselves some Ethereum. But really what they were doing was depositing Ethereum to the creator of the contractor. So basically the hackers were being hacked by the creator of these honeypot contracts. So it was like pretty interesting, right? And definitely something that is something you'll have to watch out for. If you're developing Solidity code and you're using external contracts, make sure if you're using the constructors that you use them with the new keyword for sure, and do all the best practices, because yeah, never fun to lose money like that, but very interesting vulnerability. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I know I certainly did, learning about this one. And in the next video, we'll be checking out short address parameter attack. And yeah, be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Hit the like button as well. And if you guys want to learn more, go down on this journey of learning about Solidity vulnerabilities and exploits, check out this playlist right here, Cryptocurrency and Solidity. Particularly the most recent videos are where I'm going through this stuff. So I'll see you guys right over there. And thanks for watching.